The glow of the laptop screen cast long, dancing shadows across the unfamiliar hotel room. It was 3 a.m. and sleep was a distant country I had no visa for. Outside, the rain in Seattle was relentless, a percussive drumming on the window pane that seemed to count out the seconds of my own churning anxiety. For the 10th time, I clicked on the Airbnb listing, the images still pristine, still alluring. A modern cabin, nestled in the dense, evergreen forests of the Olympic Peninsula. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a minimalist aesthetic, a hot tub steaming invitingly on a secluded deck. It was supposed to be our anniversary trip, a digital detox for me and my husband, Ben. A place to escape the city, to breathe air that didn't taste of exhaust fumes and ambition. The listing, hosted by a man named Mark with a staggering number of 5-star reviews, called it the Glass House. The irony was a physical weight in my chest. We had booked it for 3 nights. We lasted less than 2. It had started, as most things do, with a feeling. A faint, almost imperceptible sense of being off-kilter. The drive itself was breathtaking. A winding ribbon of asphalt cutting through cathedrals of ancient pines. Ben was ecstatic, his hand resting on my knee, his usual tension from his high-pressure finance job melting away with every mile we put between us and the city. I wanted to feel it too, that release. But a knot of unease had been tightening in my stomach since we turned off the main highway onto a gravel road that seemed to lead deeper and deeper into an unmappable wilderness. "Are you sure this is it?" I'd asked, my voice small against the crunch of the tires. Ben, ever the navigator, had the route downloaded. "Trust the tech, Sarah. And trust Mark's impeccable directions." Mark, our host, we never met him. His communication was exclusively through the app. Prompt, cheerful, and slightly sterile. He'd sent us the code for the electronic lockbox an hour before check-in. "The key is inside. Make yourselves at home. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Let me know if you need anything at all. Enjoy the serenity." The cabin, when we finally arrived, was stunning. It was less a house and more a work of art, a collection of sharp angles and vast panes of glass that seemed to invite the forest inside. The interior was Spartan but luxurious. Polished concrete floors, a sleek black kitchen, a single, perfect fiddle leaf fig in the corner. It was exactly as advertised. Yet standing in the middle of the living room, I felt a prickle on my skin, the kind you get when you feel a draft from an unknown source. "Wow," Ben breathed, dropping our bags. "This is insane. Worth every penny." He walked over to the massive window that made up the entire back wall, looking out at the dense wall of ferns and moss-covered trees. Total privacy. I forced a smile and busied myself with unpacking our groceries. The silence of the place was profound. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, listening one. I shook my head, chiding myself. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? An escape from noise. It was just taking some getting used to. That first evening was a study in forced relaxation. Ben put on some music, a mellow indie playlist that seemed to be swallowed by the cavernous space. We cooked dinner, drank a bottle of wine, and tried to settle in. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing towards the windows, the setting sun turning them into black mirrors reflecting our every move. "It's like being in a fishbowl," I murmured, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. Ben laughed. "A fishbowl with no one around for miles to look in. Relax, babe. It's beautiful." He was right, of course. The rational part of my brain knew he was right. But another, more primitive part, felt exposed, watched. I kept hearing things. A faint, rhythmic clicking from somewhere in the main living area. When I mentioned it, Ben strained to listen. "I don't hear anything," he said, pouring more wine. "Probably just the fridge cycling or the house settling." I let it go. Later, as we were getting ready for bed in the loft-style bedroom, which also featured a massive window, I noticed a tiny, black dome mounted high on the wall, right above a bookshelf. It looked like a smoke detector, but sleeker, more modern. "That's a weird smoke detector," I said, pointing. Ben glanced at it. "It's probably one of those fancy smart home things. Detects carbon monoxide, smoke, probably tells the host if we're burning toast. It's a high-tech place." He kissed my forehead and climbed into bed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the little black dome. It seemed to stare back. Sleep was fitful. I kept waking up, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a floorboard creak downstairs. Each time, there was nothing but the oppressive silence and the faint, silvery light of the moon filtering through the trees. The next morning, I felt groggy and on edge. Ben, however, was fully embracing the wilderness fantasy. He made coffee and suggested a hike on one of the trails Mark had recommended in his digital guidebook. I agreed, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As we were getting our boots on, I noticed something odd. I had left my book, a thick paperback, on the arm of the sofa, face down to mark my page. Now it was on the coffee table, closed, with the corner of a promotional flyer tucked inside as a bookmark. "Did you move my book?" I asked Ben. He was tying his laces, his back to me. "Nope, haven't touched it." A cold dread washed over me. It was such a small thing, insignificant. But I knew with absolute certainty where I had left it. I was meticulous about my books. I never dog-eared pages, and I certainly never used trash as a bookmark. "That's weird," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Maybe you just forgot?" Ben suggested, finally looking up. He saw the expression on my face. "Hey, what's wrong? You've been jumpy since we got here." I tried to explain the feeling of being watched, the clicking sound, the book. He listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He saw a beautiful, expensive cabin. I saw a stage. He saw serenity. I saw a threat. "Sarah," he said gently, taking my hands, "we're in the middle of nowhere. No one is here. Mark, the host, lives hours away. You're just not used to the quiet. Your brain is filling in the blanks. Let's go on that hike. It'll do us good." I allowed myself to be persuaded, to believe that he was right, that I was being paranoid, a city creature unnerved by the wild. The hike was beautiful, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth and pine. For a few hours, I almost forgot the feeling. We held hands, talked about our future, and felt like the couple in the anniversary photos we were hoping to take. But the moment we stepped back inside the cabin, the feeling returned, stronger than ever. The air was cold and still, and the clicking was back. This time, Ben heard it too. "Okay, that is a weird sound," he admitted. We tracked it to the entertainment center, a minimalist black console beneath a wall-mounted TV. It seemed to be coming from the Wi-Fi router, a sleek black box with a single, pulsing blue light. Ben unplugged it. The clicking stopped. "See? Just a faulty piece of electronics," he said, sounding relieved. But when he plugged it back in, the clicking didn't immediately resume. Started again. 5 minutes later, soft and rhythmic. That afternoon, while Ben was in the hot tub on the deck, I started my own investigation. I felt like a character in a thriller, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I had to know. I started with the smoke detector in the bedroom. It was mounted high on the wall, at least 10 feet up. I dragged a heavy armchair from the living room, my muscles straining. It wobbled as I climbed onto it, my hands reaching for the plastic casing. It didn't twist off like a normal smoke detector. It was attached to a mounting plate with tiny screws. My blood ran cold. Who screws a smoke detector to the wall? I rummaged through the kitchen drawers, my hands shaking, until I found a small multi-tool in a guest essentials kit. With trembling fingers, I managed to loosen the screws. The plastic cover came off in my hand. And there, nestled inside the hollow casing, was not the complex circuitry of a smoke detector, but a single, small, black camera lens, no bigger than a pinhead. It was aimed directly at the bed. A wave of nausea and violation so profound it almost made me fall off the chair washed over me. I scrambled down, the plastic casing clattering to the floor. I stood there, panting, staring at the lens. Every moment we had spent in that room flashed through my mind. Changing our clothes, sleeping, being intimate, the conversations, the whispers, the arguments. All of it observed, recorded, consumed by a faceless stranger named Mark. My first instinct was to scream for Ben, to smash the thing to pieces. But a different, colder instinct took over. If there was one, there were more. I had to find them. The smoke detector was a professional, covert setup. This wasn't the work of an amateur. This was methodical. I thought about the other sleek, black, modern devices scattered throughout the house. The Wi-Fi router. I went downstairs, my feet like lead. I picked up the router. It was heavier than it should be. I found a small seam along the side and pried at it with the multi-tool. Popped open. Inside, surrounded by the normal components, was another lens, this one pointing out into the main living area, covering the sofa, the kitchen, the entire space. The clicking I had heard was the shutter or some internal mechanism of the recording device. Then I remembered the bathroom. It had a small, black air freshener plugged into the wall, one of those digital ones that supposedly puffs out a scent every half hour. I had thought it was odd that it never seemed to make a sound or emit a smell. I stormed into the bathroom and ripped it from the socket. I smashed it against the concrete floor. The cheap plastic shattered, and among the fragments lay a tiny circuit board and another lens. This one had been pointed at the shower. I felt a guttural sob escape my lips. The sheer, calculated perversion of it was staggering. This glass house wasn't designed for guests to see the forest. It was designed for the host to see the guests. We weren't renters. We were the unpaid, unwilling cast of his own private reality show. Ben came inside then, wrapped in a towel, his hair wet. "Whoa, what's going on? What was that crash?" He saw the shattered plastic on the floor, the open router on the console, and the look on my face. My wild-eyed, tear-streaked terror finally broke through his wall of rational skepticism. "Sarah, what is it?" he whispered. I couldn't speak. I just pointed. I pointed at the broken air freshener, at the gutted router, and then I pointed up, towards the bedroom loft. He followed my finger, and I saw the moment he understood. His face went from confusion to disbelief to a dark, cold fury I had never seen in him before. He didn't say a word. He walked over to the armchair, climbed up, and looked at the camera himself. When he climbed down, his knuckles were white. "Pack our things. Now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We're leaving." The next 10 minutes were a blur of frantic, silent activity. We threw our belongings into our bags, a shared, sickening feeling of being watched permeating our every move. We knew he could be watching us right now. He would see us packing. He would see that we knew. The serene forest outside no longer looked beautiful. It looked menacing, a place to get lost, a place where no one would hear you scream. As Ben was grabbing our bags, I grabbed my phone and started filming. I filmed the camera in the bedroom, the one in the router, the smashed one from the bathroom. I narrated what we had found in a shaking, whispery voice. It felt important to have our own record. What if he wiped his own servers? What if it was our word against the word of a 5-star superhost? As we were about to walk out the door, Ben stopped. He looked at me, his eyes dark. "Wait." He walked back to the living room camera, the one in the router. He picked it up, looked directly into the tiny lens, and held up his middle finger. Then he unplugged it and put it in his pocket. He did the same for the one in the bedroom. "Evidence," he muttered. The walk to the car was the longest of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like footsteps. I was convinced Mark was out there, in the woods, watching us leave his stage. The drive back down the gravel road was a silent, high-speed retreat. We didn't speak until we hit the main highway and the blessed, ordinary sight of other cars. The first call was to the police. The second was to Airbnb. The police were empathetic but pragmatic. They took our statement, took the devices Ben had taken as evidence, and promised to investigate. They warned us that because the property was in a remote county, it might take time. The call to Airbnb was a different kind of horror, a corporate, soul-crushing one. We were routed through a series of customer service agents, each one requiring us to recount the entire humiliating, violating story from the beginning. They were full of scripted apologies and promises to launch an immediate investigation. They offered a full refund and a voucher for a future stay, a suggestion so absurdly tone-deaf I almost laughed. A voucher? To risk this again? We demanded they take the listing down immediately. They said they couldn't do that until their investigation was complete. For 2 more days, the listing for the glass house remained active, available for the next unsuspecting couple to book. In the weeks that followed, the true impact set in. The police did eventually investigate. They found more cameras. They found a server in a locked closet in the cabin's crawlspace with terabytes of video files, categorized by date and guest name. Files of us. Files of dozens and dozens of other couples, families, and solo travelers. Mark was arrested. His real name wasn't even Mark. He was a tech professional with no prior record, a quiet man who lived in a suburb 100 miles away. His motive, as far as the police could tell, was pure voyeurism. The legal proceedings dragged on. Airbnb finally took the listing down and permanently banned the host, issuing a sterile corporate statement about their zero-tolerance policy, on a violation they had allowed to flourish under their very noses. But the resolution felt hollow. The damage was done. The trust one once had in the simple act of renting a room from a stranger was shattered. For months, I couldn't be in a room without scanning the corners, checking smoke detectors, unplugging clocks. Ben became more protective, more anxious. The memory of our violation became a third person in our relationship, a silent ghost that followed us home. The horror of the glass house wasn't just the cameras. It was the realization of how fragile our sense of security is. It was the knowledge that in the age of sharing, you never really know who is on the other side of the screen, or behind the lens watching you live what you thought was your own private life. The house on Troop Square in Savannah was a confection of wrought iron and peeling paint, a grand old dame sagging elegantly in the humid Georgia air. From the outside, it was everything I'd romanticized about the South. A deep porch with a swinging bench, windows like sleepy eyes veiled by cascades of Spanish moss, and the faint, sweet scent of jasmine hanging heavy in the atmosphere. I had rented the entire home for a month. The listing on Airbnb was adamant about that. Entire historic home to yourself. Find your muse in the heart of Savannah. As a writer struggling with the difficult second act of my novel, a gothic thriller no less, the promise of solitude and inspiration was irresistible. My muse, however, turned out to be less literary and more a creeping, insidious dread that took up residence in the back of my mind and refused to pay rent. My host was a woman named Eleonora, who met me on the porch the day I arrived. She was as much a fixture of the house as the creaking floorboards, a tiny woman with bird-like bones and a cloud of white hair pinned in an elaborate bun. Her eyes, magnified by thick glasses, held a watery, distant quality. She gave me a tour that was both exhaustive and strangely curated. "This is the parlor, the dining room. We had such wonderful parties here. The kitchen is updated, you'll find everything you need," she chirped, her voice a reedy whisper. But her tour came with peculiar caveats. She would point to certain doors with a long, bony finger. "Now this door," she'd say, tapping a white-paneled door at the end of the upstairs hallway, "just leads to attic storage. Very dusty. No need to go in there. The key is, well, I've misplaced the key years ago." Another door off the kitchen, a low, squat thing, was dismissed as an old pantry. "The foundation is crumbling in there. Best to leave it be." In a house with 3 bedrooms, she strongly suggested I use the one at the front. "It gets the best light," she'd said, though it also faced the square, offering less privacy. I was renting the entire home, yet it felt like I was being subtly corralled into a specific, pre-approved path through it. At the time, I dismissed it as the endearing eccentricity of an old woman attached to her lifelong home. The first week was blissfully productive. I set up my laptop on the grand mahogany desk in the parlor and the words flowed. The house was quiet, its silence broken only by the gentle chime of a grandfather clock in the hall and the distant laughter of tourists in the square. But then, the small oddities began, tiny tears in the fabric of my solitude. I bought a specific brand of artisanal cheese from a local market, a small, expensive wedge I was saving for a treat. The next day, a small slice was gone, a clean cut, as if someone had shaved a piece off with a sharp knife. I frowned, certain I hadn't touched it. I reasoned. Jet lag, creative frenzy. I was probably more absent-minded than I realized. A few days later, the thermostat, which I kept fixed at a brisk 68 degrees, would be turned up to 74 when I woke up in the morning. I'd turn it down, only to find it warm again after returning from a walk. I sent a message to Eleonora, asking if the system was automated. Her reply was swift and dismissive. "Oh dear. The old house has its quirks. The thermostat has a mind of its own sometimes. Just give it a firm tap." Then came the sounds. At night, when the city quieted, I would hear things. A faint, shuffling sound from the floor below me. A soft cough that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I told myself it was the house settling, the groans of old wood and plumbing. Savannah is a city of ghosts, after all. Perhaps I was just letting the atmosphere get to me. My protagonist was being haunted, so maybe I was subconsciously method acting. But the feeling of being watched, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety, began to grow. I started feeling like I wasn't alone, even in the shower. I'd whip the curtain back, heart pounding, to find nothing but steam and tile. The most unsettling thing was the smell. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up to the faint, cloying scent of lavender talcum powder. It was the same scent that clung to Eleonora. It would be there for a moment, a ghostly presence in the air, and then it would be gone. My self-doubt began to wage a war with my intuition. Was I losing my mind? Was the stress of my deadline manifesting as paranoia? I started to feel like the heroine in a gaslighting thriller, questioning my own perceptions. The turning point came 2 weeks into my stay. I had a specific research book, a dense tome on 19th century morning rituals, that I kept on my desk. One morning it was gone. I searched the parlor, my bedroom, my bags, a frantic edge to my movements. It was nowhere. I was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack, convinced I had truly lost my grip, when I found it. It was in the kitchen, inside the freezer, nestled between a tray of ice cubes and a carton of forgotten peas. There was no rational explanation for it. I lived alone. I had not, in some fugue state, placed my research book in the freezer. It was a message, a prank, a warning. It was a deliberate act meant to unnerve me, and it worked. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark parlor, listening, and I heard it, clear as day. A floorboard creaking in the upstairs hallway, right outside my bedroom door. It wasn't the random groan of an old house. It was the specific, measured sound of a footstep. I held my breath, my blood turning to ice. I heard another, then the soft click of a door closing. The door at the end of the hall. The one that led to the dusty attic storage. My fear was suddenly replaced by a cold, sharp anger. I was not crazy. I was not alone. The next day, I became a detective in my own horror story. I went to the hardware store and bought a canister of talcum powder. Not lavender, a neutral, unscented one. That evening, before I pretended to go to sleep, I sprinkled a fine, almost invisible layer on the floor in front of the locked attic door. I did the same for the squat pantry door off the kitchen. Then I went into my bedroom, barricaded the door with a heavy armchair, and waited. I must have drifted off, because I was woken abruptly around 2 a.m. by a sound from downstairs. A soft thud. I crept out of bed, my phone in my hand, its screen the only light. I slipped out of my room and tiptoed down the hall. The powder in front of the attic door was undisturbed. My heart sank a little. Maybe I was wrong. But then I crept down the grand, curving staircase, each step a potential betrayal. The house was silent. I moved into the kitchen, my bare feet cold on the linoleum. I shone my phone's flashlight on the floor in front of the low pantry door. And I saw it. A single, perfect footprint in the fine white powder. And leading away from it, a trail of faint, dusty outlines. Someone had come out of that door. My breath hitched in my throat. I stared at the door, the one Eleonora had dismissed so easily. It had a simple skeleton key lock. I jiggled the handle. Locked, of course. Forcing it was out of the question. But there was a small gap at the bottom. I got on my hands and knees, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I peered into the darkness. I could see nothing but black. But I could smell it. The faint, sweet, unmistakable scent of lavender. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police seemed premature. There's a footprint in some powder I put on the floor? They'd think I was a lunatic. I had to have more proof. The next day, I left the house, making a show of leaving for a long day of research. I walked to a coffee shop a few blocks away, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold my cup. My mind was racing. The house wasn't haunted. Someone was living in it, secreted away in the walls. Who? Eleonora? It seemed impossible. She was so frail. How could she move around so silently? Was it someone else? A squatter she didn't know about? No, the lavender scent, the moved book, it felt personal. Felt like her. I decided to search for the key. Eleonora had said she'd misplaced it, but I didn't believe her anymore. I went back to the house, my sense of violation now a burning fire. I searched everywhere. In dusty drawers, in old porcelain vases, in the pockets of coats hanging in a hall closet. Finally, in a small, antique tea tin on the mantelpiece, beneath a collection of old buttons, I found it. A small, ornate, rusted skeleton key. It looked like it belonged to a dollhouse, but I knew. I took a deep breath and walked to the pantry door. My hand was trembling as I inserted the key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a groan of metal on metal. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door. It swung inward into a small, dark space that smelled of dust and damp earth and lavender. It was a pantry, but at the back of it, behind a rack of empty canning jars, was another door, a crude, unpainted wooden one. It was slightly ajar. This was the moment my story could either end with me running out the front door, or the moment I found out what was really happening in that house. My writer's curiosity, a dangerous and powerful force, won out. I pushed the second door open and stepped through. I was not prepared for what I found. I was in a narrow, cramped corridor, dimly lit by a single bare bulb. It was like the service passages in an old hotel. To my left, a steep, narrow staircase led up. To my right, the corridor continued into darkness. I took the stairs, my every sense screaming. They emerged into another hallway, this one clean and modern, and at the end of it was a door, from which a sliver of blue light emanated. I could hear the muffled sound of a television. I crept forward, my heart a wild bird in my chest, and peered through the crack of the slightly open door. The room was a small, fully furnished studio apartment. A neat little bed, a small kitchenette, a comfortable armchair. And sitting in that armchair, her back to me, was a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair. Eleonora. She was watching a small television, a half-eaten bowl of soup on a tray beside her. She was wearing a pink housecoat, and the room was thick with the scent of lavender talc. My blood ran cold. She had never left. She had been here, in this hidden apartment within the walls of my entire home. The whole time. The food from the fridge, the thermostat, the sounds, it was all her. She was moving through the house at night through these secret passages, a ghost in her own home. But then my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw something that turned my cold dread into pure, unadulterated terror. On a small desk next to her chair was a monitor, and on that monitor was a live video feed, split into 4 screens. One showed the parlor where I worked. One showed the kitchen. One showed the front porch. And the fourth, the largest, showed the bedroom I was sleeping in. It was a crisp, clear color image of my unmade bed. I stifled a gasp, clapping a hand over my mouth. I saw a small, black dot on the screen, on the wall above the bed. Camera. They were hidden all over the house. She had been watching me, every moment, working, eating, sleeping. The realization was a physical blow. The violation was absolute. This wasn't just an eccentric old woman. This was something monstrously deceptive. A predatory voyeurism hidden behind a veil of southern charm and sweet old age. I backed away from the door, my movements jerky, clumsy. I knocked over a small table in the secret hallway. A vase on it wobbled and crashed to the floor. The sound of the television in the room stopped. I heard the chair creak. "Who's there?" Eleonora's reedy voice called out, no longer chirpy, but sharp, alert. I didn't wait to answer. I fled. I scrambled down the narrow staircase, through the pantry, not bothering to close the doors behind me. I burst into the kitchen and ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks. I didn't grab my laptop, my clothes, my research. I left everything. I ran out onto the porch, down the steps, and into the sun-drenched square. I didn't stop running for 3 blocks. I found a bench, collapsed onto it, and called the police, my voice a hysterical, sobbing mess. Explaining the secret passages, the hidden apartment, the cameras. It sounded like the plot of the very novel I was trying to write. But when they went to the house, they found it all. The hidden apartment was real. The secret corridors existed. And the cameras were there, embedded in the walls. Eleonora was gone. By the time the police arrived, she had vanished. Her car was gone from the garage out back. Her secret apartment was tidy, the soup bowl washed and put away. The only things she'd left behind were the monitors and the faint, lingering scent of lavender. Airbnb was, again, a nightmare of corporate procedure and scripted apologies. They refunded my money, of course. They took the listing down. But the damage felt irreparable. I got my belongings back a week later, retrieved by a police officer. Touching them felt strange, as if they were contaminated by the memory of being watched. I never finished that novel. The plot felt too real, too raw. The horror I had been trying to invent on the page was nothing compared to the quiet, methodical horror of what I had lived. I had rented a house, but I had been an unwitting performer in Eleonora's private theater. And now, in every house I enter, every room I sleep in, I find myself looking for the seams, for the hidden doors, haunted by the knowledge that sometimes the most terrifying ghosts are the ones that are still breathing. The offer was too good to refuse. A life raft in the turbulent waters of a cross-country move. I was relocating to Denver for a tech job, and the housing market was a nightmare of bidding wars and non-existent inventory. I needed a place to land for a month or 2 while I searched for something permanent. That's when I found the Atrium on Airbnb. It wasn't just a room, it was a lifestyle. A private bedroom and bath in a massive, newly built co-living complex downtown. The photos showed sleek, minimalist design, sprawling communal spaces, a gourmet kitchen, a cinema room, a rooftop garden with fire pits, and a vibrant community of young professionals. The price was surprisingly reasonable. The host, a man named Jonas, had a profile that radiated charisma. He described the Atrium not as a building, but as a curated community for creators, innovators, and forward thinkers. It sounded like a utopian solution to my very practical problem. It was, in reality, a meticulously designed trap. My arrival was a whirlwind of manufactured warmth. Jonas met me in the lobby, a cavernous space of polished concrete and blonde wood. He wasn't what I expected. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, with a perfectly trimmed beard, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of serene confidence that was both calming and slightly unnerving. He gave me a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Liam, welcome. We're so glad you chose to be here with us." The tour was impressive. The facilities were state-of-the-art. But as Jonas led me through the communal spaces, I noticed the other residents. They all seemed to be in their 20s and 30s, all attractive, all dressed in a similar style of simple, unbranded clothing in muted earth tones. They moved with a strange, placid grace, and when Jonas introduced me, they would stop what they were doing, offer me the same serene smile and say, "Welcome, Liam. It's good to have your energy here." The repetition was odd, like they were reading from a script. I brushed it off as New Age Denver weirdness. My private room was small and Spartan, more like a high-end dorm room than an apartment. It had a bed, a desk, a small closet, and a window that looked out onto a central courtyard. It was clean, sterile, and impersonal. Jonas explained the ethos of the Atrium. "We believe in shedding the unnecessary," he said, gesturing around the bare room. "Material possessions, like negative thought patterns, create clutter. Here we focus on the essential, on connection, on synergy." It sounded like a TED Talk, and I nodded along, eager to make a good impression. The first few days were a strange blend of corporate onboarding and summer camp. There was a schedule of optional activities posted in the communal kitchen. Morning meditation, evening synergy circles, communal dinners prepared by a rotating schedule of residents. I was encouraged, gently but persistently, to join in. It's the best way to integrate, to become part of the flow. A woman named Alara told me, her eyes wide and sincere. I tried. I ate the communal dinners, which were always the same bland but healthy vegan fare, quinoa, steamed vegetables, tofu. I noticed that no one brought in outside food. When I once brought back a pizza, I was met with gentle, pitying smiles. We find that processed foods disrupt the body's vibrational frequency. A man named Kai explained softly, as if I were a child who didn't know any better. The synergy circles were even stranger. We would all sit in a circle on floor cushions while Jonas would lead a discussion. The topics were always abstract, revolving around concepts like releasing egoic attachments and harmonizing with the group consciousness. People would share deeply personal stories of past traumas, but they would speak about them with a detached, emotionless calm, always ending with how the atrium and Jonas had helped them transcend the narrative. Anyone who expressed frustration, anger, or strong individual opinions was gently redirected by Jonas. That sounds like the old energy-speaking Liam. He'd say to me when I tried to debate a point, let's focus on finding alignment, not friction. A creeping sense of unease began to replace my initial optimism. I felt like I was in a social experiment. The residents' placid demeanor started to seem less like peace and more like sedation. Their conversations were circular, always looping back to the community's philosophy. I tried asking one of them, a graphic designer named Ben, about his work. I contribute my skills to the community's branding, he said vaguely. Jonas has given me the opportunity to align my passion with our collective purpose. I later found out that the community's branding meant designing websites for a dozen small companies, all of which, after some late-night digging, I traced back to a single-parent corporation. Jonas was the CEO. No one seemed to have a life outside the atrium. Their jobs, their social lives, their entire existence seemed to be contained within these four walls. I was the anomaly, leaving every morning for my tech job in the outside world, a world they referred to with a mixture of fear and disdain as the chaos. My colleagues at my new job became a lifeline to normalcy. I'd tell them stories about the atrium, trying to frame it as a funny, quirky living situation, but their reactions validated my growing fear. Dude, that's not a co-living space, that's a cult. My desk mate, Mark, said bluntly. I laughed it off, but the word lodged in my brain. The pressure to assimilate mounted. My 1-month booking was nearing its end, and Jonas requested a meeting with me in his minimalist office, which he called the Clarity Space. He sat opposite me, his hands steepled, his blue eyes searching mine. Liam, he began, his voice smooth as honey. Your energy has been dissonant. You're still holding on to the chaos. But we see your potential. We see the light in you. He then made his pitch. He offered to let me break my lease at the other apartment I'd finally found. He offered me a permanent place at the atrium at a reduced rate. He even offered me a position within the community, leveraging my tech skills to work on his corporate projects. It's time to stop straddling two worlds, he said. It's time to commit, to find your true home, your true family. The word family sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't an offer. It was a recruitment. I politely but firmly declined, telling him I was excited about my new job and my new apartment. The serene mask slipped from his face, just for a second. I saw a flicker of cold, hard anger in his eyes before it was replaced by a look of profound disappointment. I see, he said slowly. You're choosing the path of resistance. We only hope you find your way back. The atmosphere in the building changed overnight. The gentle smiles were replaced by looks of pity and concern. Residents would approach me with hushed whispers. Are you sure about your decision, Liam? The chaos is so damaging. My keycard suddenly stopped working for the gym and the cinema room. A system glitch, Jonas explained via text. Though it was never fixed, they were icing me out, isolating me. My final week felt like a prison sentence. The night before I was scheduled to move out, I came back from work to find Jonas and two other male residents, Kai and Ben, waiting for me in my room. They hadn't knocked. They were just there, standing silently. My heart hammered against my chest. "Liam," Jonas said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We need to talk about your transition, to ensure it's harmonious." He explained that before I could leave, I had to go through an exit interview to process my experience and a digital detox to cleanse the community's network. This meant I had to turn over my personal laptop and phone to them for security protocols. This was the final blaring alarm bell. They weren't going to let me just leave. They were going to wipe my devices, erase any evidence I might have, emails, photos, notes about the strange goings-on. They wanted to control the narrative, to ensure that the only stories that left the atrium were ones they had approved. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "That's my personal property. I'm not giving it to you." Kai took a step forward. "Don't make this difficult, Liam. We are all on the same journey here. Your resistance creates friction for everyone." I looked at their calm, determined faces and realized I was in genuine danger. These were not reasonable people. They were zealots and I was a heretic. I knew I couldn't fight them. I had to be smart. I feigned compliance. "Okay." I sighed, trying to look defeated. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed about the move." I handed over my laptop and my phone. Jonas's smile returned. "Excellent. This is the path to clarity." They told me I could collect my devices in the morning after my exit interview. As soon as they left, my mind raced. They had my phone, but my work laptop was in my backpack. They didn't know about it. I couldn't stay for the interview. I couldn't risk what that might entail, more psychological manipulation or worse. I had to leave now. I shoved my work laptop, my wallet, and my passport into my backpack. I left everything else, my clothes, my books, my toiletries, the material possessions Jonas claimed to despise. I waited until after 2 a.m., when the building was at its quietest. I slipped out of my room and moved through the darkened hallways like a spy. The place felt different at night, the minimalist architecture seeming more like a prison, the silence more like a threat. I knew there were cameras everywhere. I kept my head down, my hoodie pulled up. The main lobby doors would be locked. I had to find another way out. I remembered a service exit in the underground parking garage. I took the fire stairs down, my footsteps echoing in the concrete well. Each sound was magnified, terrifying. I found the garage, a vast, empty space smelling of concrete and cold air. The service door was at the far end, a heavy steel door with a push bar. I prayed it wouldn't be alarmed. As I approached it, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was Alara, the woman who had first welcomed me. She wasn't smiling. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "You can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't just leave. It's not how it works." For a second, I thought she was going to scream to call for the others. But then she looked past me, towards the stairwell. "Go," she hissed. "Just go. Don't look back." I didn't need to be told twice. I hit the push bar. The door opened with a loud clang, and I was out, spilling into a cold, deserted alleyway. I ran. I ran without stopping, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders, the night air of the real world feeling like the sweetest, most precious freedom I had ever known. I never went back. I called the police from a 24-hour diner, but my story was thin. A weird co-living space? People who were a little too friendly? A request to see my laptop? There was no physical crime they could act on. I called Airbnb, and their response was predictably useless. Jonas wasn't a host. He was a property manager for a corporation. They were just a platform. They took my statement. They did nothing. I lost my deposit and a month's rent. I lost all my belongings. I lost my personal phone and laptop. But I got out. A few weeks later, out of a morbid curiosity, I looked up the atrium again. The listing was still there, glowing, and it was filled with brand new 5-star reviews. One of them was from a Liam P. My name. The review was gushing. A transformative experience. The atrium isn't just a place to live. It's a place to become. Jonas and the community helped me shed the chaos and find my true alignment. I left a better, more centered person. They hadn't just tried to trap me. They had stolen my voice, twisting my escape into a story of their success. The horror wasn't just that I had stumbled into a cult. It was how easily that cult had disguised itself as the future of urban living, how it had weaponized the language of wellness and community, and how, in the end, it had the power to erase my truth and write its own.